comments.
Okay. A few words. Of course, Suresh does not need to be introduced, but it's a pleasure for me to do it anyway. So I asked for it. And he has a lot of talents, as you know, right? In particular, the thing I prefer is the fact that when I do something with him, I'm sure it will be published. So it's a guarantee for publication. So with me alone, zero chance. But with Suresh, it works. It's extremely good, and he knows what to do in a paper so that the paper be well considered by reviewers. Think about that. That's great. So he's really a professional. He understands how to manage people, students, and so on, and how to exchange with reviewer, explaining, and at the end of the day, it is published in UTD 24. Okay, so it does, but he has a lot of additional talents. He's a good friend, and of course, as everybody knows, he's the one who brought me here. So I will not forget that. Okay, thank you, Suresh, and we look forward to your talk.
That's a payback for the fact that I hired him. Thank you. Okay. Let me begin with why I'm presenting this. I presented this talk several times in different places. And also, several years ago when I did a Polycarp Kush lecture, I did a similar talk but without any equation. Because that was a public lecture. It was not an easy thing to do without equation. But now, it's a much more technical talk, although there's no proofs here. There's no more concepts than proofs in mathematics here. So why I came to this, I'm a latecomer to supply chain coordination. But when I came to this one, I found that there were a couple of things missing. One was that all the supply chain coordination paper was single period. The world is not a single period, and I was wondering why there is no paper on supply chain coordination with multiple periods. The other one was the agents for all risk control, and I have another paper in which I developed the risk averse agents in supply chain and developed the idea of coordination using Pareto optimality. But that's not the topic I'm covering today. What I'm covering today is how to coordinate multiple supply chains. So the first thing, I realized that people did not do multiple period supply chain because either it was intractable, or it was not getting any closed form solution, or it was not something that's publishable. Whatever the reason, I decided I'm going to work on this problem. And then I realized that part of the reason why people did not do that is because the theory of dynamic Steckelberg chains was not available to the OR community. There had been a paper in control community many years ago which was literally inscrutable, and somehow we worked on that to try to understand that and try to even generalize with student and also with Professor Jessisa. And so that's sort of kind of introduction. That was around more than 10 years ago that I came across this problem. So now let's continue. Okay, so here's the plan of the paper. I will. Where is that? There you go. So everybody knows this, but I will briefly talk about that, and then I will go into a video of A Beautiful Mind. There's a Mars scene. I will take that example, and I work on that example with Nash and Steckelberg equilibria. Then later on, I will go to multi-period supply chain, in particular a two-period supply chain. I have two examples of that. One is a 2015 paper that I published in POM, where I coordinate a two-period supply chain. I then go into define what is an equilibrium in multi-period supply chain, and then develop a two-period revenue sharing contract. And if time permits, I will go into this leader-follower mixed leadership game where a leader can be a follower in some decisions and leader can be a leader in some other decisions. So that would be a mixed leadership game that was published in Science Journal of Control in 2019. I conclude the paper, then there's some references, and if I have time, I will give you some little thing on what is the ongoing research after. So that's our simple supply chain. Supplier sets the wholesale price to maximize his profit, and retailer in response decides on order quantity to maximize his profit, and their self-serving actions do not maximize the total profit of the supply chain. And so this particular resulting insufficiency is called double marginalization, partly because the supplier puts up a margin over his cost to set the wholesale price, the retailer earns a margin over what he pays to the supplier, and so there's another margin involved, and that's called double marginalization. By the way, that name, I wanted to change that name, but I'm not going to do it. There are problems where you don't have the margins. In the set of marketing, there are advertising problems, and you also get the double marginalization there without any margins. So it is more of a mathematical idea of nested optimization versus the global optimization. That's basically the reason why there is an inefficiency in supply chain coordinate in supply chains. But anyway, I'm not going to get into that. So supply chains are modeled using Steckelberg equilibrium or Steckelberg game, because there's a leader, there's a follower, it's a sequential game. But that is not so popularly understood. So I'm going to first go into the Nash game and then draw the difference between Nash and Steckelberg. For that, we all know, and I have done some italics just to give you the differences between that. So in the game of two or more players, a set of decisions by the players in Nash equilibrium, if no player can do better by changing his decision while the others stay with their decision, that is the important line here in the Nash equilibrium. Vice versa, if the player can do better by changing his decision, knowing the other people's decision and treating them as set in stone, then the set of decision is not a Nash equilibrium. So let's go to this scene here.
You want to call me, gentlemen? Deep breaths. Nash, you might want to stop shuffling your papers for 5 seconds.
I'll not buy you John beer.
Oh, we're not here for beer, my friend.
Oh. Anyone else feels she should be moving in slow motion?
Will she want a large wedding, you think?
Should we say swords, gentlemen? Pistols at dawn?
Have you remembered nothing? Recall the lessons of Adam Smith, the father of modern economics.
In competition, individual ambition serves the common good.
Exactly.
Every man for himself, gentlemen.
Yeah, and those who strike out are stuck with their friends.
I'm not going to strike out.
You can lead a blonde to water, but you can't make her drink.
I don't think you said
All
that.
right, nobody move. She's looking over at She's looking at Nash.
Oh, God. All right, he may have the upper hand now, but wait until he opens his mouth. We lost him.
Oh, yeah, that's the history books.
Adam Smith needs revision.
What are you talking about?
We all go for the blonde. We block each other. Not a single one of us is going to get her. So then we go for her friends. But they will all give us the cold shoulder because nobody likes to be second choice. But what if no one goes for the blonde? We don't get in each other's way. And we don't insult the other girls. That's the only way we win. That's the only way we all get laid. best result comes from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself, right? That's what he said. That's right. Incomplete. Incomplete. Okay? Because the best result would come from everyone in the group doing what's best for himself and the group.
Ash, this is some way for you to get the blonde on your own. You can go to hell. Governing dynamics, gentlemen. Governing dynamics. Adam Smith.
He's wrong.
Careful, careful.
Thank you.
I'm sure when I first saw that movie, I'm not sure I got all of this stuff that we are seeing here right now, and also the subtitles. But anyway, in the movie, Nash thanks the blonde for his epiphany and goes home to write his masterpiece called Non-Cooperative Games, in which he developed the concept of Nash equilibrium. And the four friends, I suppose, act on Nash's advice and go for the brunettes. The question, do they decision form a Nash equilibrium? Answer, no, it is not a Nash equilibrium. Since each friend could gain for going for the blonde, while the other stayed with the brunettes. So this is, again, the operative idea that equilibrium requires, Nash equilibrium requires that the other people stay with their decisions. So like in the single period maximization problem, there's one inequality. But when you get to the two period Nash game, two people Nash game, you get two inequalities. That's what define the Nash equilibrium. And in each inequality, one guy maximizes, the other one stays with the decision that they already made in the equilibrium kind of. So that's kind of the operating here. And so, so now I'm going to do a simpler version of this game with Tom and Dick and two women, Emily and Linda, and both men prefer Emily to Linda, and neither guess any, they both choose the same one. But I'm going to take this game also to Stackleberg game later. While I was doing this, Anjali was with me, my daughter, and she said, blonde and brunette is not politically correct. And so now you say Tom and Dick and Emily and Linda instead of bronze and brunette. And here you see two Nash equilibria. Tom chooses Emily, Dick chooses Linda. And the other equilibrium is Tom chooses Linda, Dick chooses Emily. Remember, the Nash equilibrium doesn't tell you how to get there. It only tells you what it is. So that's kind of the equilibria here. And in the first one, if Tom deviates by going for Linda, he suffers by getting none. Likewise, if Dick deviates by going for Emily, he suffers the same thing. And so similar arguments false for two. So now let's get a little bit of a thing here. Stakelberg wrote his thesis in 1934. And you know that the book that we are familiar with, von Neumann-Morgenstern book, is actually 1944 book. So one would think, John von Neumann is the guy who basically began the field of game theory in some way, at least the modern game theory. But it turns out that von Neumann has already written a book in 1948 in German. It's called On the Theory of Parallel Games. And so, but once again, von Neumann and Morgenstern basically do zero-sum games. They don't do, the zero-sum game, there's only one objective function because one maximizes, the other minimizes. But Nash equilibrium, everybody has their own objective function. And so that's where the big benefit or big contribution of Nash comes in. Okay, so move on. I'm going to now change that game to Steckelberg game. So in the Steckelberg game, given that Tom is a leader and Dick is a follower, it is a sequential game. They are not making simultaneous decisions as in Nash game. They are making a sequential decision in which case what happens is that the backward induction means first the Dick solves his optimal response for any decision that is made by Tom. So that is the backward step, the backward induction step. And the leader knows the response function, and knowing the response function, leader decides his action. And then when he decides the action, clearly the Dick's action is already decided because he already decided the response function, and then that becomes a Steckelberg solution. Sometimes I call it a solution because in a certain sense it is slightly different from the equilibrium, and I'll let you know that later on. But anyway, so here when you do the backward induction, you can see that there are response functions. I showed them as purple, yellow, blue, and gray. Basically they are functions. So the first one is function of Emily is Linda, and function of Linda is Emily. That is the response function. It's just like a function, but to show that the table works. Now the Dix best response function, given the Dix best response in purple, Tom's best action is choose to Emily, and we can see now that in the second equilibrium we only have one equilibrium. And so Tom gets Emily, Dix gets Linda. So we can see there is a first mover advantage here, which is not there in the Nash equilibrium, because there is no first mover there, they're all simultaneous movers. So here's the thing. If Tom chooses Linda, he loses given the rest function of Dick in purple. However, the Dick's change is not the changing from one girl to another girl. His change has to be changing from one response function to another response function. That is a fundamental difference between these two equilibria in some sense. And so now we show that the obvious difference between these two is that Nash involves simultaneous decisions, Steckelberg involves sequential decisions. Tom had the first mover advantage in the Steckelberg game as he gets Emily. Here is a subtle difference. Dick's deviation for checking the Nash equilibrium is to change his action. His action is going from the woman in the equilibrium to another one. However, if he wants to check the Steckelberg equilibrium, he has to change his response function, going from purple to another color. So that is a big and a main difference between the two games. There is another one which is less well known, and I will get to that in slide 25. Okay, so now we're going to go to multi-period games, and as I often mention, and Ben Susan also does, that going from one period to two has all the richness of dynamics. And going from 2 to 3 doesn't give you any more richness in dynamics, but it gives you more complexity in terms of equations and solutions and whatever. It's just more complicated mathematically and algebraically, but not conceptually. So we're going to stick with the two-period decision, two-period supply chains for the time being, and then later on when I define, I'll switch back to multi-period supply chain. So when you go to two-period supply chains, or two-period Steckelberg games, even Nash games, you have to decide the type of solutions. And there are many different kinds. In fact, the first paper that Kellen sent you by mistake is the paper that we articulate this number of different Steckelberg solutions in the dynamic setting. But here I will only commit myself to 2. So one is an open loop solution. The open loop solution, supplier announces the wholesale price in period 1 and 2 at the beginning of the game. That's open loop. It says everything is decided in the beginning. And the retailer's best response takes both these prices to decide the order quantity in each period. That means that if you were to decide or name the retailer's order quantity Q1 and Q2 in period 1 and 2, then Q1 will be a function of P1 and P2. Because P1 and P2 is already decided. So we don't see that in a sense in open loop solution that is possible. The leader continues to have the first mover advantage because open loop game, in fact, is a static game. It is simply the decisions become scalar versus vector. You think like a math programming, where the time doesn't enter. If the decisions x1, x2, u1, u2 are just a vector. There's no time in the sense of the 2 comes after 1. Okay, so this is the reason why all the open loop settings, multi-period or single period, multi-period, they will all be single period and leader will continue to have a first mover advantage. The drawback, and is a big one, the drawback is that the solution does not take into account the realization of anything random that is happening. So in period 1, if the demand is random, demand is going to be realized, but nobody takes that into account. The decision already been decided. And so because of that, it's also not time consistent. That means if you were to solve the problem in the second period, you may find that the solution is not the same that you started with, which means that the leader has an incentive to renege, because if he gets much more benefit by changing his decision in the second period, he will do so, or he might do so. So the thing is, in economics, they call it full commitment solutions. And nobody has ever done beyond that, because let's say it's a full commitment solution. It means that suppose, so first of all, they also invoke a court. That is, it's an agreement, and if somebody reneges on the agreement, you go to the court. But then another problem opens. If you go to court, this is a civil action, and maybe the court has a maximum penalty, let's say $1 million. What if reneging on the decision gives you $2 million more money? So there's an incentive to renege again, even if you have to go to the court and pay $1 million. And I have not seen any paper in economics that brings in a court with a finite punishment. The court has infinite punishment, but infinite punishment, the days of slavery are gone. You can't just kill somebody just because you wrote a bad check, right? So my question is that is a simplification, but it doesn't solve the real problem. So we don't want to do the open loop. Although open loop is done a lot in the literature simply because sometimes we write papers because of mathematical expediency. We can solve it so we can publish it. Now the feedback step of solution. The supplier announces only the first period wholesale price at the beginning of period one, but then somehow the period one solution must anticipate what happens in period two. And that is how the backward induction comes in. This is where the anticipation comes in. Period two, supplier announces the second period wholesale price after observing whatever is random, that is realizing. Inventory, demand, whatever. Okay? Retailer responds to supplier's wholesale price period-wise and obtain the period-wise order quantity. Both consider the state observed in the second period. The solution is time consistent because if you resolve the problem at any other period, it will be the same solution. So there is no need of a court, there is no need of worrying about reneging because that is what it is. But leader only has a period-wise first mover advantage. It may not have a global advantage. However, I still propose feedback solution because I can coordinate. If I can coordinate, this particular aspect goes away. Because everybody, once you coordinate, you restore the supply chain entire profit, and the additional profit that you get because of removing that inefficiency, you can split that profit one way or another. So everybody gains, and so my question is that particular restriction or whatever it is, that particular property of the feedback solution is not important if you can coordinate the supply chain. Okay, so my first application is going to be this paper. So once again, as I told you the story, I thought that stochastic inventory problem with the random demand probably was not done at that time. That wasn't done because it was mathematically not tractable or it was not going to give you a neat enough solution. So my purpose to find a two-period coordination was to find a problem that is simple, that allows the tractability, but it is stochastic in the sense it's a genuine two-period stochastic problem. Okay? So I invoke a new problem. The new problem is called cost learning. So the production cost of production in the second period declines in proportion to the quantity produced in the first period. So that's the dynamics. The cost becomes the state variable, and I know the cost in period one and the cost in period two will be a random variable. And the reason I call it a random variable is because new period production, sometimes you do not know exactly what is the learning curve. The learning curve itself is a stochastic thing, and it is semiconductor manufacturing when it was going on. The second period cost of production depend on advances in technology, and you did not know exactly what it would be until you get realized. So let's give you a little bit of this. A learning curve, one of the first papers in learning curve is by Wright, 1936, showed that direct cost of manufacturing AFM fell by 20% with every doubling of unit development. It was an empirical paper. And every time I show this picture, although this picture is way away from Kitty Hawk, the Wright brothers flew, they think this Wright is the same guy. But this is obviously not the same guy. 1936 is way out. But anyway, and there are a lot of economics papers, including the paper by Kenneth Arrow on learning by doing. So I'm not going to get into that. There's a huge amount of literature. All I want to know at this point is that the learning effect is dynamic and stochastic. That's all I need to know. Cost falls with cumulative production over time. And empirically, the rate at which the observed cost declines may vary widely, especially in industries and across departments. And also when it's essentially if the product that you are producing is rather new. So that's what I just said. So now I get a genuine stochastic two-period problem. What I'm going to do here is the cost becomes stochastic, but I'm going to let the demand become slightly more complicated than the Newswender problem. I will take the demand to be price dependent, but deterministic. So newsboy, the demand is stochastic, but not price dependent. Generally, the standard newsboy, and in our setting, it will be a demand which is price dependent but deterministic. So the stochastic element comes in the cost. And in 2009, we did eventually find a paper that actually does the two-period newsboy problem, but there are some issues here. One of them is they don't define what the Steckelberg equilibrium is. Two, they do make some mistakes, which actually can be corrected. And the three, they don't make, it's not even clear whether they're doing open loop or closed loop. But anyway, in the paper we say a little bit more about that. But I'm just saying that we cannot simply say that we were the first people to do it, because there was a paper that did talk about two-period cost. Okay, so let me just go to this one. So anytime you do supply chain coordination, first thing you do is establish a benchmark. The benchmark is if the supply chain is owned by one company, then they can do, there's no wholesale price involved here, there's no internal transfers here, and so you can solve the problem with a single agent problem. That's called a centralized problem of a monopolist manufacturer. Learning curve creates interdependency between production cost and cumulative production quantity. The demand being price dependent. You need to find out what are the optimal production quantities in period 1 and 2. And you can think about the first period production. You might want to have a higher production in the first period than otherwise, because higher production in the first period will reduce the cost in the second period. So and since the demand is price dependent, you might have a price to be a little bit lower than what myopic solution or what other solution might give. So those are some of the things that you might see. So reduce price, increase demand. But remember, in our generally supply chain coordination problem, usually the price is higher. The retailer pushes a higher price because it doesn't want to order not enough quantity because he's afraid of not being able to sell some of the quantities. And that's why you get this revenue sharing or buyback contracts to coordinate the supply chain. Okay. So manufacturers set the price of production, learning experience takes place. But now we go to decentralization. Now retail has a pricing power in this setting. Double marginalization is there because we need to check. If there's no double marginalization, there's no need to coordinate. But Yes, there's a double marginalization in this problem. And even more so, because learning creates even more double marginalization. So let's basically say that there is a double marginalization, so there is a need for coordination. So now the manufacturer has to decide on how much to produce and what is the wholesale price to charge. And then the learning experience happens, and the retailer has to decide on retail price and order quantity, and then they sell in the market. Now we have two papers, two sections in the paper. One is that the manufacturer cannot carry inventory, and the second one is the manufacturer can carry inventory. We do have a working paper that has never been finished, but it should be because everything is in place, where both manufacturer and retailer can carry inventory. But the inventory, when it carries, it becomes a strategic inventory, because the retailer can think of himself as a producer in the second period by having this inventory. And there have been papers by Anupindi on that with no coordination, deterministic selling, where they do talk about strategic value of the inventory in a two-period setting. So, anyway, but we're not going to get there. My purpose now here is to simply get to the dynamic Steckelberg setting and go as much as possible in that direction. Okay. So in the two period, the first period is the infant stage, the second period is the mature stage. There are papers on this kind of situation by Nobel laureates here, some of them. So here are the notation here. AI is the market participation period I, which means that is the maximum one can sell even if the price was zero. B is the price sensitivity. I can change that to BI in the period 1 and 2, but to just make it simple, just P. PI is the retail price in the period I, WI is the wholesale price in the period I. Cost and learning parameters, C1 is the production rate in period 1, which is given to us. C2, which is a capital C2, here the capital C means random cost in period 2. When you observe that, it will be C2, which is the small C2, which is the realized production cost in period 2, and lambda is the learning rate. And QI is the retailer's order quantity in period I, the big QI is the manufacturer quantity in period I. Sorry about that, big Q. This is not random, but it is. I had to make a distinction between Q and Q. Okay. So the sequence of event, I'm just going to go like this. Let's go this far. Okay, so everybody knows C1. The manufacturer announces W1 and Q1, and the retailer responds to by setting the P1 retail price and order quantity Q1. After that period 1 infant stage learning takes place, and C2 is realized as C2. Everybody observes C2, and after observing C2, manufacturer decides on W2 and Q2, and the retailer decides on P2 and Q2. Remember, I2 is silent because I'm not doing the section 2. If the section 2, then inventory would be another state variable, that would be a two-state variable, cost and inventory. But it doesn't add anything more in terms of what I'm trying to produce. It creates a little bit more math, and it gives you bragging right that this is the first time somebody has a two states and still coordinate the problem. But it is not more complicated than the section 1. Okay, so demand will be simple. It's a standard demand, AI minus B times PI. Random, that's the state equation now. This is the equation C2 is C1 minus lambda times Q1, lambda being a random variable. It turns out, at least in this setting, because the setting is specific, a particular case in some way, in the general setting, you need the distribution of lambda. But in our setting, it turns out that when you do all the calculations, all you need is the mu and the sigma. You don't need anything more in the setting that we have. Okay, the manufacturer may or may not have the option inventory carryover, which you only do one part. Back orders are not allowed. Manufacturing is forward-looking, second fair game. These are some innocuous assumptions. They only are required because when I do the first order condition, if it's less than 0, I have to say min and 0. So in order to avoid that, I make these assumptions. Nothing to talk about. So centralized problem is maximize over P1 Q1, the expected profit. This is the P1, the price times the minimum. You only sell the minimum of what you produce and the demand. And then you cost by C1 times Q1 because you produce Q1. And then the second period, let's see to the random variable, and again you do the P2 times this, and so this is the problem. Straightforward in programming, backward induction, everybody can solve that, and so we have solved it. So when you solve, we get P1 star. Some people might want to consider C1 as a random variable, in which case you observe the C1. But anyway, C1 is given here. So you see P1, you see Q1 star, you see P2 star, you see Q2 star, you see C2 star, and you see the profit. So everything is closed form. I can get the profit of the centralized profit, and it is easy for me then to compare the decentralized profit to that profit and show that there is double quantization. I'm not going to do that here, but it's easy to do given that they are all formulas. So the dynamic problems, no inventory. So we have a manufacturer here, and these are all the quantities that will affect his profit. And because that is random, we put an expected value here. Again, the retailer will have all the quantities, and again, the retailer has a different objective function here. This is W1, or this is the profit of the manufacturer because he only gets W1 times what is ordered, but his cost is C1 times Q1, and again, the same thing is happening. Here, the retailer is selling the goods, and so that is the Q1, the minimum of that, and Q1. This is the whole. That's the cost of the retailer is not the cost of production; it's what he pays to the wholesaler, to the manufacturer. So that is W1 Q1. So you can see these are objectives. That is the state equation, and we assume manufacturer leader and retailer will follow. Here, I will spend some time. This is a notation only. And it is very important to have a very precise notation. Even here, I may have to make a few more additions to make it clear what is going on. This is a photo, so I cannot change it today. Anyway, so I'll tell you what is going on there. Okay? So I'm deciding a notation because in order for me to define the Stackelberg equilibrium, I have to give you a notation. The proof, we have done what is called verification theorem, where we solve the problem, and the verification theorem tells you it is a Stackelberg equilibrium. We're not going to get into that, okay? Well, we're going to go into just define what it is, and very clearly do so, okay? So, first of all, the leader in a feedback Stackelberg equilibrium, the leader determines her strategy in a feedback form, which is U, comma, X, comma, T. X is the state variable at time T. I should really write it as an XT, but I didn't do it because we sometimes don't put T in our control literature, but given here, I should do the T. And also because I'm doing a finite horizon here. So this should be X, comma, T, but you understand that. The follower strategy is based on the leader's decision, and it's going to be in the form of V. He also observed, follower also observes X, also observed the time, current time T, and also observed that. But notice, this is not a function. Because if you knew the function, it becomes a calculus or variation problem. It's become rather difficult and intractable in some way. So it is what he observes. So when the manufacturer observes X and T and decides the X and U, that U comes into there. Okay? It's not like a functional form, but it's a quantity that is decided. Okay. So we specify the leader strategy as U. This is a U of X11, U of X22. I didn't put the index again, but that index should be there to be made clear. So that is the U. That is the decision over all these people. Follower strategy following that is V of X1 of comma 1, U X1. Again, there's X1 there, and all the way down there. Then there are constraints. For example, U could be bigger than or equal to 0 if it's advertising. So let U and V denote the spaces of such strategies, U and V. And we can put any constraints you want there, but then we define those spaces. Now let's take a feasible U in U And let's take a feasible V in V. Remember, U is all of that string. V is all of that string. So take a feasible U in V. And now, because we are doing dynamic programming, or we are doing a time constant solution, we can take the problem at any given t. Not at time 0, but any given t. So any given t, oh sorry. Any given t, I have a state variable xt whose value is y. So I observe the value y at time t, and I go forward. So time will change from, the I is the time index, is go from t to t plus 1 to n. Okay? And the state equation is x of I plus 1 is xi plus some function. The function will have xi, ui, vi, lambda I, and I. So there will be 5 quantities that are going to be in that function. So this is a perfectly general state equation. And I'm now giving you a general setting for what is called the Steckelberg equilibrium definition. The next thing is to define the objective function for a feasible set. So we need to define what is the profit for these two feasible strategies U and V. And so that is given. So that's the leader. T and Y are the initial condition. This is the Ty, so initial condition has to be there. And these are these decisions that I'm doing. And now I'm defining what that is. The expected value because of a variable lambda. And remember there are 5 quantities here. There's 1 quantity missing here. I should put comma and I. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I forgot to put I. Now let's look at the leader's profit. It's a profit which is a function of x, the function of x. But x is observed to be this quantity. So it is x of ty I u v. And it's a function of u. But u is a function of xt and uxt. So u is x of ty I u v I. Then there's a u opens here and that it closes here. Okay. Then v opens here and closes at this blue mark. So v has an x, it has an I, it has a u, and each one of them, of course, like the u, this u is also inside the v. So you got that. And then you have a lambda I, and then you have a comma I. So that was missing here. Okay? So we got the feasible solution for any uv, for any initial condition, for any initial time. And there's a salvage value which you can put there at the end, which is the salvage value. So now we have the profit. We can do the same thing for the follower's profit. So we can do all of that, and then we are ready to write this. A pair of strategies U star in U and a V star in V is called a feedback Steckelberg if the following holds. JL of U star, V star, dot U star, because U star is equilibrium, is bigger than any other U in U for any Y, for any T. This is true. This is the first inequality. Now notice, U is given. So when U star changes, U is here to U, but V star, the response function still is V star. So the V star operates on the new U, and you can see that that inequality has to be holding for equilibrium solution. Now let's look at the other guy. So the other guy changes V. When he changes V, the inside argument is still U star, because the other guy is not changing it. For all V, for all response functions in V, for all Y, for all T. So this is slide 25. So this is the definition of secondary equilibrium. Now what happened is something that is not quite well known, but I'm going to say it here anyway. It turns out that Steckelberg does not require the second inequality. The second inequality, even the U guy can change. It's for all V and all U. Because after all, the response function was an optimal response function. So the Steckelberg is stronger than an equilibrium. Kind of stronger than the two inequalities that you have in Nash equilibrium. So that, unfortunately, doesn't go through. So when you generalize the Steckelberg from one period to multi-period, this aspect of Steckelberg in a single period setting does not generalize. So it becomes more like Nash. So when you go to multi-period solution, Steckelberg and Nash are almost similar except the space of deviation changes. So if I were to change that U, if I were to change that view similar to that U, it becomes a Nash field. So the difference between Steckelberg and Nash is how you define that V. And that V is a function like this. It's this string. So similar thing, but that is the main difference. Okay? So one part that I really like, and this was, I presented this talk many years ago in not all the supply chain coordination, but in Russia somewhere, and one of the Russian guy asked me, what about this second inequality? So I'm now bringing the second inequality. I told him, this is that. Okay. So now, we can go backward solution, which is what people do without defining. And you can see the wholesale price, product quantity, order quantity, retail price, and all of that. This can be derived by doing that backward induction. And now we need to find out how to behave. So the way this gets, even though we solve backward in time, the solution proceeds forward in time, obviously. So in period 1, everybody knows C1, and they look at this table. Everybody has this table now. So they look at this table, and they give you this wholesale price. And they look at this table, they decide how much to use. They look at this table, and the follower looks at the table, and he decides Q and stock. The retailer price also looks at this table. So remember now, when he decides Q and stock, he has already decided what has been announced by the leader. So that quantity goes in there. So after he announces, it is not as a function. You don't put that as a function. You put that as the quantity that is announced. Okay? And then retail price. Then the second period, the state realizes, and also price and production quantity again can be decided, and the retailer follower can decide this. So this is how the solution is implemented, and that's what I mean by anticipating. That means when you do period 1, somehow or the other you have to anticipate what happens in period 2. So that's that. So now we go to the revenue sharing contract. Given the solution in the centralized and decentralized setting, one can see the supply chain profit is lower than that. Okay, so we're going to now go to basically here. Manufacturers propose a revenue sharing contract with a set of contingent wholesale prices and revenue sharing rates. So these are the wholesale prices, these are the revenue sharing rates in each period, and the phi I is the retailer's portion of revenue period I. So this is the definition of a revenue sharing contract. And here is the contract. So first of all, this means revenue sharing. And retailer's problem in the revenue sharing contract is a different problem than it was before, because now revenue sharing, another thing comes in, phi comes in. So that the way you define the profit function is slightly different, and it's different than the previous one. So the profit function is the retailer's portion of the profit, which is phi 1 times that, minus the wholesale price he pays, and the retailer's portion of the profit, and this, and then same sharing. In principle, you have to solve this problem to show that it's in equilibrium. So we have a paper called 5 Steps to Supply Chain Coordination that's not published yet. There we show that the literature does not do everything that is needed for supply chain coordination, although everything they do is right. But they are not giving you everything that is needed. Okay, so for phi 1, phi 2 in 01, the manufacturer sets the wholesale price, and that wholesale price, then this is the coordinating contract. I want to make 2 observations here. First of all, now, if you go back to revenue sharing contract in our standard literature, you will see that the second period is like this, just like phi 2 times C2. And that is true because second period is a single period problem. So that anything happens second period has to be a single period problem. It will be consistent with all the literature on the static supply chain coordination. But you can see that one has been never derived in the literature. That W1 is so different from that one. This is what is happening in a two-period supply chain coordination with a single period. The first period contract quantity was never done before. So it's a new result in some way, whatever it's worth, it is a new result.